All right, welcome to my virtual workshop to return to running postpartum. I'm going to walk you through an effective 5-step strategy so that you can return to running with strength and confidence. If you're early postpartum, it's the perfect time to start working through these steps. But you can also think of it as improving your running postpartum because if you're not super early postpartum and you've already been back to running, little tweaks with these fundamentals can make a huge difference. And honestly, if you've never had babies, or even if you're not a woman, these fundamentals are still really important. In this presentation, we're going to understand the changes that happen in the body during pregnancy, what exactly that means for your running, potentially even years or decades later, and how intentional specific strength training can be used to run again with strength and confidence, and how simple tweaks can make a huge impact on your running performance, and the steps to making it happen. Before we dive in, I want to mention I'm going to do as good a job as I can to deliver all of this information and actionable information in the shortest amount of time possible. But I also know that you are short on time as a mom. So if you click that little icon in the bottom of your screen, the gear icon, you can speed this up to 2 times the normal speed and get through it in half the time. Slow it down if I feel like it's going too fast or something that you feel like you're missing. But that's kind of my little trick. I do that all the time with videos and I want to respect your time. So I want to let you know that that is an option. So a little bit about me. You can read all about my credentials on the slide or even more below this video. What I think is most important is my journey through running and motherhood. Running is was and is, always my sport. It's my me time, my stress relief, my main mode of physical fitness. It's the source of the majority of my friendships and even my relationship with my husband. Our first couple of dates were trail runs together. Needless to say, it is very wrapped up in my identity. So when I had my first baby, I was so anxious to get back to it that I started way too fast. And almost 6 years later, was still having problems with incontinence, low back pain, hip pain, and just pushing through. I can tell you all sorts of embarrassing stories about peeing my pants in races. And honestly, it's the reason I'm super thankful I was wearing black pants or black shorts in the bottom left photo. This was actually the day I decided enough is enough. I'm going to do something about it. I'm not going to bore you with all the stories though, but I just want to mention it because I feel like it's really important to normalize that conversation. Not everyone is going to experience symptoms of incontinence upon returning to running postpartum. Um, but if you do know that it's common, but not something you have to live with and not something you have to accept. But the bottom line is, through all the peeing and the pain, along with my faults in the movement mechanics that were causing said symptoms, it kept me frustrated and prevented me from reaching my full potential in running. And this story of too much too soon, my story of too much too soon, leaving me struggling for years, is not unique. Because of that, I've made it my mission to find a better way, to educate myself and others. And my comeback after having my second baby was so much different. I am a much stronger runner now, and I'm proud to say I've helped many moms do the same. So, what's the big deal, right? Run forever, many of you. Running is a single leg dynamic and plyometric exercise. It's not easy. You need balance, strength in your feet, strong lower legs, knees, quads, glutes, hamstrings, pelvic floor, core. Everything has to be working together. If it's not working together correctly, at worst, it can lead to leaks, tightness, pain, etc., all the things that I experienced. At its best, even if you're not experiencing said symptoms, It leaves you not performing at your full potential. And this second case is what I call the invisible ink. And part of why I think of returning to running postpartum intentionally as an opportunity to become a better runner overall, because everybody has these underlying muscle imbalances. These imbalances, again, cause you to not be performing at your full potential. And oftentimes they're written in invisible ink, or what I say, they're written in invisible ink because they don't cause problems, symptoms, or pain until there's a stress on that symptom system. That stress could be increased volume, load, intensity, and training. We runners probably have all experienced that at some point in our lives, our running careers, quote unquote. It could be simply getting older and these imbalances finally catching up to you. That stress could also be pregnancy. And oftentimes that is the stress that tips the scale. Sure, pregnancy itself creates some muscle imbalances on its own, with the changes to your posture and core and the load down on the pelvic floor. And we'll talk more about those specifically in a minute. But often it also uncovers existing imbalances. It reveals the little things that maybe weren't a problem before, but likely have been preventing you from performing at your full potential. Pregnancy and other stresses reveal the invisible ink. And that's part of why I look at pregnancy and early postpartum as an opportunity to become a better runner. It's a time where you can it's a reason to slow down and work the foundations when you probably wouldn't take the time to slow down otherwise. So I want you to lead with this and fully adopt this like opportunity mindset, because taking the time to work the foundations can have a huge impact on your performance and your enjoyment of your sport overall, your longevity of participation in the sport. I don't know about you, but I want to be able to run forever. Because when you move, and it's all comes down to this. When you move with proper form mechanics, you move efficiently. When you move efficiently, you can do so with more strength and power, and you get more out of everything you do. Let's look at how pregnancy plays a role in all of this. So my young oldest loved watching this video when I was pregnant with the baby. He just was like totally wowed by this whole thing that was going on in my body. But just look, the hormones, the baby grows, internal organs like literally get pushed out of the way. Your posture changes. By the end, that heartburn, inability to hold your bladder because nothing is in its regular place. Your ribs getting spread out, the diaphragm's not really working. And then, we pop the baby out and think it all goes back to normal. It does. That's not necessarily the case. So let's kind of zoom in on this last bit again. So first, the diaphragm gets pushed up and the ribs spread out. We don't normally think of the diaphragm as like a super important muscle to running, but it really has a huge influence on not only the function of your core, but the way you breathe, believe it or not, has an influence in the balance of your hip muscles. So the more and more I learn, the more and more I believe the diaphragm is one of the most important muscles in your body. Sometimes those ribs spread out, flare out to make room for the baby. That also affects the diaphragm and core function. Of course, there's the pressure down on the pelvic floor from the growing baby. So this is before even delivery. So even if you had a C-section, your pelvic floor still um, is likely not functioning at its full capacity. The Obviously, right, the abs stretch out big time, but we often don't think about what happens on the other side of that, because the abs are stretched out and because you have a huge like extra weight in the front. Those back muscles have to overcompensate and tighten, and that doesn't just go back to normal right away. You have postural changes, you have the increased anterior pelvic tilt. It leads to muscle imbalances like tight hip flexors and weak hamstrings, also common for just people who sit a lot. You have postural changes up top, like from shoulders rolling forward, holding the baby. All of this matters for how we're able to absorb and distribute force when we run. And then on top of all of that, we have the hormones, not just the ones that made you cry at the drop of a hat, but the ones that play a role in ligament laxity. Wonderful thing for growing and birthing a baby. Not the best. It's one of those things that kind of revealed everything that was written in the invisible ink, because you got a little bit loosey goosey in the hips, and then all of these sudden these imbalances that were there before that didn't bother you are now starting to bother you. It's the reason why these hormones kind of stay elevated in your body, not to the same level as pregnancy, but to a non-baseline level upon if you're still breastfeeding. So you need to worry about even getting stronger to balance that out. It's the reason why many women report an increased foot size, that ligament laxity, all the way down to your feet. You have difficult pain in your feet, difficulty effectively supinating and pronating. This is really important for how we sense the ground with each step. And the icing on the cake, the stress and sleep deprivation of being a new mom. Now, this last one I say just as a reminder to give yourself grace in this process. Now, without any further ado, though, let's work through the steps. My 5 steps to returning to running postpartum, or like I said, improving running postpartum, because it's never too late to work these fundamentals. First step, you need to reestablish good 360-degree diaphragmatic breathing to connect the core and the pelvic floor. Um, the core is not just your abs, it's your diaphragm, it's the pelvic floor. They all work together to manage inter-abdominal pressure and stabilize the body so that you can effectively absorb and transfer force and power as you run. Now, everybody needs to work these foundations again, but postpartum, this is extra important because this system gets completely disrupted by literally growing a human in the middle of it. So, practicing it wherever you are in the process, wherever you are in the postpartum continuum, is super important, though, for activating those deep core stabilizers that are important for running. And that's why I put re in the quotes, because this is something that many people actually never master, having babies or not. And that brings us back to that opportunity mindset. One quick thing before we try this, I highly recommend my new mamas to go see a pelvic floor physical therapist at least once during pregnancy and at least once postpartum, to really, they're, they can give you the feedback to really know what it feels like to relax and contract your pelvic floor. If, especially if you feel like, I'm not really sure if I'm feeling it, definitely highly recommend going to see one. Okay, so let's try it. If you're watching, if you're sitting, standing, you can try this later, maybe laying on your back in an all fours position for more effectiveness of it. But just wherever you are, plant your feet on the floor. We're going to master your inhale first. So take an inhale through your nose, expand down into your belly, your sides, and in to your back, not breathing in and your shoulders go up and down. So breathe down, relax the pelvic floor. Big, deep inhale. And then just relax, exhale. On the next inhale, we're going to focus on a forceful exhale. So you can choose 2 different options. You can choose blowing out like you're blowing through a straw, or a ha breath, like you're trying to fog up a window. If you are newly postpartum, I recommend the latter, the ha breath. If you're further out postpartum, you can choose one or the other, whichever one feels good. I like the ha breath no matter what, but that's what my body needs. Anyway, okay, so inhale, relax the pelvic floor, diaphragm comes down, expand into the belly, sides, back. Now take a forceful exhale, ha breath or pursed lips, engage the pelvic floor. Let every last ounce of air come out. Feel those deep abs contract and those ribs come in. Make sure you don't crunch down to get the air out and keep those ribs in, use those deep abs. Let's do it one more time. Inhale through the nose. Don't force it so much that your neck and shoulders get involved. And then on the exhale, focus on getting every last sip of air out. Obviously, you don't have to breathe like this all the time, but it's a great way to practice connecting all the parts. We work through in my Run Mom Strong Postpartum Foundations course, once we connect these parts, connecting them to movement in our strength workouts so that it can carry over to running without really having to think about it or focus on it at all while you are running. Because I don't necessarily recommend focusing on breathing this deep when you actually are running. So step number 2, and it really kind of has to go hand in hand with step 1, because we can't effectively breathe, connect the diaphragm, pelvic floor, and abs if they aren't properly aligned. So we need to work on realigning your pelvis and your thorax for efficient core activation and that transfer of force. First, we'll focus on what it means to be aligned, but oftentimes it requires some focusing on strengthening specific muscles to be able to maintain that alignment. And alignment in itself and breathing with good alignment is core strengthening.
So let's play with it for a minute. If you're able to right now, stand up and try it with me. Let's look at that postpartum posture first. So we have an anterior pelvic tilt, a big curve in the low spine. The chest is kind of puffed up. There's a lengthening of the abs beyond their kind of normal baseline length tension ratio. You have your hip flexors that are kind of shortened or tightened in this position. And then worst of all, we have like this open scissors kind of situation. The diaphragm is kind of this way, the ribs flared up, and the pelvis is sort of this way with the anterior pelvic tilt. That means, I'm exaggerating here with my arms, of course, but that means the diaphragm and the pelvic floor aren't in line. We need them in line with the core at a good, core being the abs and your back muscles, wrapping around so that you can breathe efficiently and create that good intra-abdominal pressure for stability, for load transfer when you are running. So being here like this isn't great for the core. It's not great for our breath. It's also not great for being able to transfer power through the core and propel ourselves forward when we run. So we want to adjust this so that when we breathe, we're doing so efficiently, and when we run, we're transferring power efficiently. If we're not, we're setting ourselves up for increased pressure down into the pelvic floor, more like low back pain, and then just not running efficiently and effectively. Then what sometimes happens, if you're here, you clench your butt to create some stability. You may be doing this subconsciously. You might find yourself butt clenched, hanging forward into your hips, just standing in the kitchen. Check yourself, see if you're doing it. Why you're doing it is to create, your body's trying to create some stability where you don't have it. What that means for your glute strength is they're clenched all the time. We need strong glutes for hip extension to propel us forward. If you're clenching them all the time, they're going just to be overworked and weak. If you hold your bicep like this all the time, you can't expect it to be strong through a full range of motion. Same thing with your glutes. The problem is if we do this a lot, you get stuck here and it's hard to get out. A lot harder to get out of than a basic anterior pelvic tilt, where to get out of this, we want to lengthen, release the hip flexors, get good core, deep abs, get the hamstrings on to help pull that pelvis back into place, and then the ribs set on top so that we can breathe efficiently. We don't want to suck the abs in. We don't want to hold tension here all the time. So it's about using those deep hamstrings, a gentle deep abs, and the position of the joints versus just muscling through and holding it together, clenching everything up. So sometimes simple cueing and paying attention to this really helps. Other times, like early postpartum, we need to address muscle imbalances to make this posture more comfortable. Sometimes you can't even get into it. um, and make you able to endure it. So if you can get into it, can you hold it all, this posture, without really having to think about it, focus on it all the time, because that, transfers into your running, transfers into your exercises. That means core strengthening. That means hamstring strengthening. That means sometimes releasing the hip flexors. That means building glute strength, letting them go and building them through a full range of motion.
So steps 1 and 2 are a great start. It's a hell of a lot more than I ever did before returning to running after my first baby, honestly. This field has come a long way. Pelvic floor physical therapy is a lot more mainstream, but I still see a disconnect. There's this um, idea that I've done the pelvic floor rehab, I've done some of the core rehab, and then skipping right to running, and there's a cost to that. Just because you feel good doesn't mean those parts are actually ready. It takes somewhere between 6 to 12 weeks, sometimes longer, especially if you had any sort of tearing in your perineum or uh, had your abdominal muscles cut open for a C-section, to like regain that strength and the integrity in your connective tissue. A recent study actually cited too much too soon as one of the main indicators of running injuries postpartum. We need a progressive approach, something from from between the floor with the core and pelvic floor rehab all the way up to the high impact exercise that running is. And it's not just about the core and pelvic floor. I touched about this a minute ago when I was talking about the posture and the muscles that may need to be strengthening or relaxed, but let's just kind of dig into it a little bit more. Pelvic Poor pelvic and spinal stability is just the beginning of a cascade of other muscle imbalances that go on. Our bodies are smart. When we have abdominal weakness and or like an infective pelvic floor or muscles, other muscles tend to take over and attempt to create stability. Oftentimes this is increased activity of like those low back muscles, maybe experience some of that low back pain postpartum, and often it's an increase in your hip flexor activity, both as a compensation for that missing stability in the pelvis and spine, and also because of that increased in anterior pelvic tilt, those muscles sometimes just get shortened overall. So let's first look at the psoas. The psoas is one of your hip flexor muscles. When it gets overworked, it gets weaker spelled wrong on that slide, and tight. When it tightens, it pulls on, it detaches back at your spine near your diaphragm. It flares those ribs even more and it perpetuates this system. The other hip flexor muscle, your TFL, needs to work even harder because the psoas can't really do its job as a hip flexor. Then when the TFL becomes a super bully, this is a muscle that ties right into your IT band, which I know all of you runners are super familiar with. When the when the TFL is super active, the glutes get weaker, then the pelvic floor compensates for the glutes, and then this cycle continues. You have one kind of messed up situation that can perpetuate itself because no one's actually doing its job. May look kind of messy here, but let me just simplify it for you. Typically, we're talking we need more strength in the core, pelvic floor, glutes, hamstrings, adductors, those inner thigh muscles. Those are intimately connected with your pelvic floor. A weakness in one often leads to the other overworking. So, for example, if you have weak adductors, they can result in a weakened over pelvic floor, or vice versa. And again, where you end up in this kind of never-ending cycle. Working adductors means less, band around your knees, lateral band walks, and more actually squeezing a block or a ball between your knees. And this is one place where I see things sometimes go horribly wrong in the postpartum, return to run, strength training guidance. Also, muscles that are typically overworked would be your low back muscles. Your pelvic floor may be overworking too, right? It's possible to have a weak and tight, a weak and overworked pelvic floor, and that's not a happy situation to be in. And then your hip flexors. So, what does this have to do with running? We know that compensations in your running form can adversely affect the way that your tissues load and cause deficits in strength and mobility. And in other words, like running with poor form can cause muscle imbalances. But also, deficits in strength and mobility, muscle imbalances, can cause compensations in your running form. So like one causes the other and then causes the other, and then this you get stuck in this never-ending cycle. Postpartum, while we're intentionally rehabbing the core and pelvic floor before returning to a full load of running, we have an opportunity to address these deficits in mobility and strength, address these muscle imbalances, and get the whole kinetic chain working together effectively. So, no matter where you are in your postpartum journey, you can be really benefited by disrupting this cycle, right? With some very intentional strength training, working the foundations. So that kind of brings me to the next two steps. The next step is to actually integrate the pelvic floor and the core stuff we've been doing with your movements. Starting with isolating these muscles is great, but where you need them to work is while you run with all of the other muscles that are moving in your body. And actually training this way is way more fun as well. Let's get up off the floor and start moving. Step 4 is to rebalance the muscles around your hips and then get stronger overall on that foundation in your core, your hips, your glutes, the rest of your legs, and systematically integrating the core and pelvic floor with all of your like functional exercises like your squats and your lunges and your deadlifts and those kinds of things. So when I talk about integrating the pelvic floor with your movements, this is what I mean. Your pelvic floor relaxing and contracting is connected to the way your hips are moving, the way your pelvis is moving, the way your foot is moving, and how you're moving through your gait with running. Every single step you take, your foot goes through a process of supinate, pronate, supinate. Your pelvic floor goes through the process with relax, contract, relax. And we want this to be coordinated in our body so that we don't have to think about it when we actually get back to running. So this is a great way to kind of feel that coordination, sitting with your back against the wall, pressing out into your hands on the inhale, practicing that deep diaphragmatic breathing. The diaphragm comes down, the pelvic floor relaxes, and now let's get the hips into it. The hips externally rotate and abduct away from the body, and the foot supinates. This is what's happening at your heel strike and toe off in your gait. Obviously, it's not timed with your breath. You don't take a breath with every step, but using your breath, like we did at the very beginning, is a really good way to start feeling and training this connection. Now, the exhale is all the kind of opposites. The diaphragm relaxes up. You can switch your hands so that you're pressing into your hands. The pelvic floor contracts in and up. Your hips internally rotate into your hands and adduct towards the center of your body. With this, the foot pronates and grounds into the floor. And this is your mid stance of gait. You can think of the inhales as like the rebounding, and then the exhales as the absorbing of the force. And you cycle through this when you run. It's important to rebuild that connection. Remember, there was a baby inside the middle of the connection, your ligament laxity. Nothing has been talking to each other the way that it's supposed to. And this is a great way to build it back up. And then build a solid base with all of the, functional movement patterns. There was a paper released in 2019, a study of what does it mean to be ready to run, and I pulled some of these exercises out of there and some from my own experience in my postpartum corrective exercise specialist, and picked these 6 benchmark exercises to show if you have strong and stable enough to run. So can you do all of these exercises without any fault in your form? Um, so let's kind of look at them real quick. So, one of a single leg calf raises, not like full on balance, you can hold on, but not actually using anything to push yourself up, and making sure you're using your lower body and not thrusting yourself forward with your chest. Single leg bridges, being able to, in doing so, with maintaining those hips level and feeling it where you should be feeling it. Standing hip abductions, getting that hip stability, the glute med. Oh, I can't get out of it, this slide again. And then the other 3 exercises, the single leg sit to stand. Can you do that without losing stability at your knee? This one's a fun one, the single leg running man hinge. Um, ooh, yeah, there you go. Single leg running man hinge, and um, then the single leg hops, so actually getting your body to, can it withstand that impact? And here's the thing, it's not just the what with all of these, it's the how. It's not just can you do it, but can you do it using the right muscles without cheating? Runners have that like athletic mindset, that push through, figure it out. Even if you're a casual runner, I consider you an athlete, and athletes are really good at muscling through things wherever we can. So sometimes this means, yeah, you can do it, but maybe you're not actually using the right muscles to do it, and further kind of building in or compensating. So let's just look at the single leg bridge as an example. When I work up through all of these exercises in my Run Mom Strong Postpartum Foundations course, we start all the way at the beginning with a basic bridge on the floor. And maybe that basic bridge looks super easy, but it's an important place to start, because it's not just the what, it's the how. How are you breathing when you're doing it? What's happening in your core? Are you putting pressure down? Are you overusing your superficial, your rectus abdominis muscles? Are you really tapping into your deep core? Do you feel it in your glutes and your hamstrings, or your back and your hip flexors? We want the former. We want the glutes and hamstrings, but I find often a lot of runners, babies or not, feel it way more in their quads and hip flexors. So perfecting the basics is important. And then building from there, building into an adductor activating glute bridge, getting those adductors on board. And you can see kind of a little bit in this, I'm squeezing a ball between my knees. Then I'm building in some lateral resistance to further challenge my stability in the transverse plane, and then maybe some marching bridges, and then to my single leg bridges. And then in my Run Mom Strong course, we build from there to make it even more difficult, and then more dynamic. So building actually a hopping action into it, because these are your baseline strength exercise. I want you to be stronger than baseline. And we're building, a strong and stable base to run on, and running is a dynamic exercise. So remember, when you move with proper form and mechanics, you move efficiently. And when you move with efficiency, you can do so with more strength and power and performance and get more out of everything that you do. In my Run Mom Strong Postpartum Foundations course, we systematically work through mastering all of the 6 benchmarks exercises, plus all the supporting core and pelvic floor work, adding more impact work in once a good base is established, week after week after week, making sure that the foundations are mastered first. So steps 1 and 4 are build a strong, stable base to run on, essentially. There's a lot of words and a good 20 minutes of saying that, and I think I gave you a couple of steps and examples of how to do that. We need a strong and stable base that absorbs and transfers energy to propel you forward as efficiently as possible and while protecting your joints and your pelvic floor from the impact. So then we're on to step 5. This is a step that everybody can't wait for, and then has a somewhat love-hate relationship with. Step 5 is strategically build back running volume on the solid foundation. But we're not just jumping in and running, like going out and running 3 miles. We're purposefully and systematically progressive so that that runner mindset doesn't take over and you push back past where your body is ready. Your cardiovascular system is going to adapt a lot faster than your muscles, than the strength of your musculoskeletal system. So you're going to feel good, but let's be intentional and build up in volume before you add intensity. So that means beginning with run, walk, and intervals, something couch to 5K-ish. I know a lot of like more seasoned runners don't necessarily love a couch to 5K because it moves really slowly. I use a more adaptable, flexible milestone approach. We go way more in depth with this in my Run Mom Strong Postpartum Foundations course. But the idea is build up in volume before you add intensity. Be purposefully and systematically progressive so that you don't pull a me and chase every person you see on the trail. And practice tuning back into the signs your body is giving you instead of letting that ego take over and push you through like you're so used to doing. It's like conditioned in us as runners, to not necessarily listen to our body and just, do it and push through. And it's hard to go slow. Trust me, I know. But it definitely pays off in the long run. I know my client Julia also is struggling with going slow, but she bought into it. She trusted me and saw the change in the process. So maybe you think, but I worked out my whole pregnancy. I've been running my whole life. The other woman I follow on Instagram went right back to running at like 5 weeks postpartum. She doesn't seem to be having any problems. One, you don't necessarily know what's going on behind the scenes. It's you just don't. Maybe she is not having any problems, but also remember that invisible link may be lingering under there. The truth is, though, if you've been working out regularly until birth, your mind may feel ready, but the rest of your body needs time to catch up. Women who work out throughout their pregnancy can actually be more vulnerable postpartum because of this. Because we talked about this, your cardiovascular system is going to ramp up and feel better faster. And then you're going to feel good and then you're going to push through. And then you might have an injury or a setback or an issue pop up. Taking it slow can actually make you a better athlete in the long run. Instead of looking at this as something that you have to do, look at this as an opportunity to slow down, not feel the pressure of intensity, and fully connect with your body. Because if you're anything like me, you probably wouldn't do that otherwise. Yeah, I said opportunity again, because patience and consistency will get you back to 100% or better. And fast progress might lead to injuries or poor mechanics and not performing at your full potential. Remember, when you move with proper form and mechanics, you move more efficiently. When you move efficiently, you can do so with more strength and power and get more out of everything that you do. Patience and consistency are necessary. Slow and steady gets you back to 100%, but fast progress with injury related setbacks and bad mechanics might only get you to 80. I know it's hard. I know it's frustrating. I know you just want to run, but follow the steps. Trust the process and look at this as an opportunity to slow down and build a better foundation to run on forever. Even though I talk about this in the context of pregnancy and postpartum, remember this concept of invisible ink. So much of this is important for everyone. It just becomes an almost non-negotiable postpartum because of the unique stress on your body. But I truly believe that if you do this, if you build a strong, stable kinetic chain to run on with a little patience and consistency, you can come back to stronger than ever. And you don't need to go through all of these steps alone. I've given you the checklist. If you ended up here in this workshop, you probably have the checklist already. If not, you can find it below this video. I showed you the exercises in the checklist. On there, there's other things related to, pelvic floor and core on the checklist as well. Um, but I also have a program that walks you through every single action step that we just went through week after week. Includes systematically mastering all of those benchmark exercises and all of the supporting core and pelvic floor work. Those workouts are intentionally progressed, providing the strengthening specific to the needs of your body, and progress intentionally building the strength and stability week after week. It's not just the workouts to blindly follow. I'm going to teach you how to look at your own body and intentionally progress through the workouts and beyond based on the unique needs of your own body. It is for you if you had a baby 6 weeks, 6 months, or 6 years ago. Remember, it's never too late to work at the foundations. You want to run with strength and confidence and without any postpartum symptoms. You want to be able to run to your full potential, and you want to systematically build strength and stability the way your postpartum body needs. Whether you've just been cleared for exercise or you've already started back and are frustrated with your progress. Systematically working through these exercises and making simple adjustments in how you're moving your body and using your muscles can make a huge impact on your running wherever you are in the process. This course is education, empowerment, and action in every single lesson. We work through all of the steps I've outlined here in this workshop week after week. Each lesson includes an education piece. We dive a little bit deeper into some of these concepts to empower you with the understanding of what your unique postpartum body needs, and an action piece with intentionally progressing the workouts that provide you that specific strengthening to the needs of your body and progress intentionally, building strength and stability week after week. You can click the enroll button now below, and when you do, you'll be one step closer to running with strength and confidence again. And if you only take one thing from this workshop, it is don't be so focused on getting back that you miss how strong you can become. Don't get trapped in your ego. Give yourself grace, allow yourself to change, and see where that brings you.